the New York subway, Detroit, Michigan, Zion National Park, Rockford, Illinois, South Korea. All sites of severe flooding over the last several weeks. As we all know, floods can be terrible, dangerous, and devastating, sweeping away houses and other structures. When I lived in Las Vegas, there was this billboard on the way from my house down to the Strip that warned people through funny pictures about the dangers of flash flooding in the desert, typical of monsoon season in July. And here in Tucson, I'm guessing that most of us have our own flash flood stories. I can remember one year I was trying to get a long loop run up Catalina Highway over to Snyder to Soldier Trail, back down to whatever that road is, Tinka Verde Road, back home. And I could not get across the Agua Caliente Wash. Snyder was flooded, so I ran south and went over. Well, that road was flooded, and I tried every side street to get across the wash. I never could get there. So those of you who live on the other side of the wash, God bless you. I mean, what a challenge it is. I guess they built the bridge over Tinka Verde, just east of Houghton, to solve that problem. But we all have those stories when we have come up onto flash floods. But despite the dangers of flash floods, most of us Arizonans really look forward to the monsoons. I mean, wasn't last night absolutely glorious? So it started lightning and thundering and raining, and Reverend Susan sent me a text and said, "This is perfect for today's sermon." And then Luke, you just said my sermon in a nutshell. We could almost go home. So I'm thinking God is at work here in the midst of the Holy Spirit, because it's that rain that makes the desert blossom, the refreshment of cooler temperatures. Did anyone look at your phone and see it's only 72 degrees? I'm going outside. Yeah, okay, I'm not the only one. Maybe some of you love to sit on your front porch or back patio just watching those storms when they come in. But monsoons, they aren't something that people can just conjure up. We have to rely on our natural world and the natural yet complex systems that create the conditions in our atmosphere that will produce those monsoons. And many believe that the inspiration for our psalm today was a great big thunderstorm rising out of the sea and moving onto the shore. And if you listen carefully to the images, you can see the movement of the storm moving onto the shore, fierce winds snapping and twisting the cedars and oaks, mighty trees, the lightning and thunder shaking the ground and the trees so deep as to vibrate the land, seemingly causing the livestock to skip. And you can feel the surge of the storm that brings on the flooding. And it's a beautiful, awe-filled picture of power. A power so strong that it can also have devastating effects, like all the flooding we experience all around the world. Which brings us to a real interesting problem that we humans have created: the building of structures in floodplains. Now, people have done that from the beginning of civilization. They have always settled in floodplains, but most of them would move out of the way when the floods came. It's only recently, since human beings became sort of fascinated with their own power and seduced by the illusion of omnipotence that technology gives us, that we began to build things in floodplains permanently. And we've seen the horrible destruction and devastations wrought by seasonal floods. Now, for some reason, we call such devastations acts of God. Now, ancient peoples looked upon floods as acts of God as well, only they did not see them as natural disasters. They saw them as blessings, because with the floods came nutrients for the fields, and they could anticipate that by the summer, certainly by the fall, they would have a rich harvest. They saw the floods, in fact, as a rehearsal of creation. For them, it was something like a sacramental time, a time when God's governance over the world was visible dramatically before their eyes. It was a time when they proclaimed that God had recreated the world. Now, we know that the Jews observed water rituals, and so we read Psalm 29 this morning, which is evidence of that. It is called an enthronement psalm. So it was used at the enthronement rite in the temple at the beginning of each year. The king would enter the temple in procession and was enthroned in the temple, which symbolized God being reestablished as God over all of creation. And then after the floods, after they had receded, they remembered that God created the world by pushing the waters back into the firmament. So with the receding waters, once again they proclaimed, God is Lord over all creation, and life restored once again as good. This psalm was sung at that service. So let's listen to those opening verses again, knowing that background. Ascribe to Adonai, O heavenly beings. Ascribe to Adonai glory and strength. The voice of Adonai is over the waters. The God of glory thunders, the Lord over many waters. The voice of Adonai is powerful. The voice of Adonai is full of majesty. Eugene Peterson, in his translation, The Message, translates the opening verses of that psalm this way. Bravo, God, bravo. Let the angels shout, encore. In awe before God's glory and visible power, stand at attention. Dress your best to honor him. So for the psalmist, a storm was an inspiration to cry glory. It was an opportunity to hear the sevenfold voice of the Lord and the thunder that shook the desert and the winds that turned the cedars of Lebanon into toothpicks. Anyone else have tree pieces on your yard this year? I know it's sort of like, okay, there it is, the power of God. And this concept of glory, of God in the midst of all of that power, it's a hard one to wrap our minds around sometimes. So I think it's more of a heart thing than a mind thing. In the Hebrew language, the word for glory is kavod, which means weight, heavy, significant, majesty, honor. So give significance and weight to God's being. You know, some things in our world are beautiful and light, when with a puff of breath, they're just gone, like a candle. But God has weight. God has staying power. God doesn't just disappear like a wisp of wind. The kavod of God, the glory of God, that's awe-inspiring. Now, you probably know from your high school history or science classes that centuries ago, people believed that the earth was the center of the universe. That included the assumption that the sun, moon, stars, and planets all revolved around the earth. And it was not merely ordinary people who held that point of view, but also members of the scientific community. And this understanding of Earth and its relationship to other celestial bodies, sometimes referred to as geocentric, held sway until the mid-16th century, when it began to be challenged by the work of Copernicus and Galileo and Kepler, who insisted that the sun, not the earth, was at the center. And friends, the church was antagonistic toward that point of view, and the church held great power at that time. But gradually, the geocentric model was replaced by the heliocentric one. So this change was nothing short of a scientific revolution, or what we now call a paradigm shift. A paradigm is this distinct set of concepts and practices that define a scientific discipline at any particular period of time. So a paradigm shift is established, is when established theories collapse and new ideas and understandings take their place. So here's a question. When a long accepted explanation of how something in the world works breaks down or is shown to be flawed, what emotion most helps scientists delve further and be willing to step into the unknown? Well, that emotion, according to Helen de Cruz, who's a professor of philosophy and humanities at St. Louis University in Missouri, is awe. She wrote, "Awe increases our tolerance for uncertainty and opens our receptivity to new and unusual ideas which are crucial for paradigm change." Awe. Awe is that experience where we look out beyond ourselves and we recognize how vast, how creative, how intricate our world and our very existence are. Those times, when no words can capture what you're experiencing. Maybe it's a symphony or the scent of a homegrown rose, looking through a telescope, touring a museum, looking at the dark night sky. Maybe it's a piece of poetry, and in the depths of your being that this is something beyond description, and you simply catch your breath and sigh. And in that, there's an assurance that we are held in God's hands, that we're headed somewhere, and in the end, all will be well, that life ultimately has meaning, and that I fit into that greater vision. Awe happens usually unexpectedly, and we can learn to recognize it. We can even learn to seek it and discover what it may be telling us when it does. Presbyterian theologian Frederick Buechner illustrates awe by telling of seeing a forest of giant redwoods for the very first time. There were some small children nearby, Buechner said, giggling and chattering and pushing each other around. Nobody had to tell them to quiet down as we entered. They quieted down all by themselves. Everybody did. You couldn't hear a sound of any kind. It was like coming into a vast, empty room. So in effect, Buechner was describing a paradigm shift. 200 or 300 feet high the redwoods stood, he said, and they made you realize that all your life you had been mistaken. Oaks and ashes, maples and chestnuts and elms you had seen for as long as you could remember, but never until this moment had you so much dreamed about what a tree really is. The kids probably didn't have life experience to identify what they were feeling as awe, but that emotion was there, and it struck them quiet. And it wouldn't have been surprising if at that moment one of those kids had an awakening to think about God, about a career in ecology or nature, or simply fell in love with the outdoors, a love that would have bearing on all the other choices that he or she made in the future. You see, awe can set a direction for life and can even move a person toward God. So we say that there's something spiritual going on when we feel awe, whether we recognize it as such, and whether or not we are a believer. And there's a paradigm shift, too, from this world is all about me to the world is larger than me, even to this is God's world. Abraham Lincoln apparently had that experience. He is quoted as saying, "I never behold the heavens filled with stars that I do not feel I am looking at the face of God." I can see how it might be possible for a man to look down on the earth and be an atheist, but I cannot conceive how he could lie looking up into the heavens and say there is no God. And Carl Sagan wrote, "How is it that hardly any major religion has looked at science and concluded, this is better than we thought. The universe is much bigger than our prophets said, grander, more subtle, more elegant. Instead, they say, no, 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 my God is a little God, and I want him to stay that way." A religion, old or new, that stressed the magnificence of the universe as revealed by modern science actually might be able to draw forth reserves of reverence and awe hardly tapped by conventional faiths. I think that you could easily make the case that our culture today is awe-deprived. Adults spend more and more time working and commuting and less time outdoors and with other people. That was totally exacerbated by our year of living through a pandemic. Camping trips and picnics and midnight skies are forgone in favor of working weekends and late at night. Attendance at art events, live music, theater, museums, galleries, all of that has dropped over the years. And unfortunately, that goes for children too. Arts and music programs in schools are being dismantled in lieu of programs better suited to standardized testing. And time outdoors and for novel, unbounded exploration is sacrificed for resume-building activities. And awe deprivation has had a hand in a broad societal shift that has widely been observed for the last 50 years. People have become more individualistic, more self-focused, more materialistic, and less connected to others. So to reverse this trend, most of us are here at church, belonging to a faith community where we do feel connected, where we feel like we have something in common with each other. So here's our challenge for this week. First, insist on experiencing more everyday awe. So if you're one of those put a Post-it note on the bathroom mirror kinds of person, remember, experience awe today, all right? Or whatever you use. Second, actively seek out what gives you goosebumps, whether it's looking at trees or the night sky, patterns of wind on the water. Those things that you know give you goosebumps, do them on purpose. Don't just wait for them to happen. And then notice the nobility of others. The teenager who gives up his or her seat on public transportation. The young child who explores the world in a state of wonder. The person who presses on against all odds. See in them nobility of character. Intentionally focus on finding those moments. Awe and wonder. May we all experience goosebumps over God's glory this week and always. Amen.